We hear a lot of worst day stories on AskReddit. People with emotionally difficult jobs, police, EMS, firefighters, doctors, nurses, therapists, etc. What was your best day on the job? I was a with 4 children, ages 8, 4, 3 and 1. You can imagine how crazed my life could be. One day, we were over at my mother-in-law's house for Sunday dinner, and I had left the kids with the family so I could run to the store to get butter or rolls, some small thing to go with dinner. When I came back, my mother-in-law said, "Did you see how your kids' faces lit up the second you walked in the door?" I hadn't seen anything. But the next time the situation came up, I paid attention this time. And she was right. I was so busy being crazy harassed mom with too much to worry about that I was missing it. My kids adored me, and I wasn't seeing it. Trust me, after that, I paid a lot more attention. That also sounds like a quality mill right there. Not many have that either. Psychologist here. I did my year-long internship at a university counseling center. While we normally only saw clients for 8 to 12 sessions, we were allowed to have one longer-term client to give us more experience. Mine ended up being this wonderful young woman who was deeply depressed. She was an identical twin. Sessions were slow going at first and there were a lot of tears. She worked through a lot and she was much better by the end of our 10 months working together. My supervisor and I talked about her frequently and she watched tapes of our sessions. The next year I was on my postdoc and I got a call from my former supervisor who had just started seeing my client's twin in private practice. The mother of the two, not knowing who my supervisor was, started talking to her about how her other daughter had gone to therapy and how her therapist had changed her life. My supervisor called me to tell me this because, as she well knows, we don't get to hear that very often. This is the exact kind of story I need to weather the anxiety of waiting to hear back about APIC applications. Thanks, senior colleague. I used to work as a janitor in a high school. There were 3 of us in the school and during the summer break, we were normally given a list of jobs to do, but we were mainly just expected to show up and be on hand if we were needed. This one year, we finished all our work super early into the break, so we had practically nothing to do. One day, I was sitting in a classroom watching movies on my phone, when my friend radioed me and asked me to come to the roof. Bearing in mind we were the only people on staff authorized to access the roof. I went up and walked outside. It was a beautiful, sunny day. My friend had set up some chairs from a classroom and had a bucket of ice with some beers floating in it. We spent the whole day up on the roof sunbathing and drinking. It was a magic time. Reminds of the Shawshank Redemption. I was a dispatcher for a residential alarm company similar to ADT. I would call people when their alarm was tripped and ask them if they were okay. One day I received a signal from a residence from a glass break sensor on a window in the bathroom. When I called, the lady was laughing so hard she could barely give me her safety password. Turns out she was cleaning her bathroom and when she bent over she farted so hard and loud it set off the sensor on the bathroom window. Edit, I somehow got a silver while having no upvotes. Nice. Silently laughing so hard right now, everyone in the office that can see me thinks I'm crying. I work physical rehab in a skilled nursing facility. I had a young, early 40s patient with a hereditary degenerative condition who had been in different hospitals and facilities for months. In addition to genuine pain and disability, she was being very self-limiting, unwilling to do pretty much anything for fear of it increasing her pain levels. Bit by bit a co-worker and I convinced her to first roll over, then sit, then stand, then spend longer and longer periods out of bed. Finally, we got to the point where we were able to do a home visit, and you could see her remembering what it was like to be in her own space. That light of desire to go home was in her eyes and she worked harder from that point on, and 2 weeks later she was discharged. Helping her into the car and waving it out of the parking lot was the best feeling I've had so far in my career. TL, doctor, was able to help someone go from bedridden inpatient to home in a wheelchair after months of painstaking work. Fucking well done. Keep up the good work, mate. I'm an EMT, and I would say one of my best days was a call we got for a young girl who was feeling suicidal. I will admit, I'm not sure she needed an ambulance, but I spent a lot of time in the back with her, talking, and she seemed a lot better and happier by the time we got to the hospital. It struck me because it was the first call where I felt like I had truly helped someone with their mental health problems. I still think about her sometimes, and I hope she's doing better. Thanks for that. I had a mental health crisis and the EMT in the ambulance was the only one who tried to actually talk to me. He treated me like a normal person. He was an angel and I wish I got his name. Wouldn't it be funny if you and /you/Humble Association were both reflecting on the same incident and they were your EMT and you were their person who needed help and you didn't realize that you had come across each other again after all this time, only now online instead of in person? I work as a police officer in a fairly busy city. At the end of a normal 10.4-hour night, it's not uncommon to have 12 calls in my history. Sometimes as many as 15 to 18. Last year in January it snowed. I sat under an overpass and did not have to move from the time I signed on, until sign off. Not a single call. Glorious. The real perfect shift. On my boss's birthday, people decided to have a cake for him, kind of a surprise party. When he got onto the room where the surprise was, he started laughing and blushing, then all of my co-workers started chatting and joke about stuff and the cake itself was pretty delicious. That day had a really good vibe, and that kind of situation is one of the reasons why I like my job. I wonder how many cake policies have prevented people from going postal. Asking people if they want cake is a decent bonding experience. I personally don't want the cake but like the gesture. But if bunches of people want the cake for you, let them. I'm nothing special, just a regular office worker doing her thing. It's very chill and I like what I do, while not incredibly inspiring. The best day on my job was the day my supervisor just kinda stopped typing, looked pensive for a few moments, and just went, "You know, Shorty, we really don't tell people enough when they're appreciated. I just want you to know we appreciate you." I have gone through years of low self-esteem professionally wise, with a myriad of agonizing jobs where I was made to feel small and that my job was a huge favor to me. Just hearing someone say I was valued was so huge for me. I still remember it was on August 11th. Policeman in small town. Got a call to try and locate a woman who was on the heart transplant list. She wasn't answering her phone or pager. Early 90s and she didn't have a cell phone. It was in the middle of the night and cold in the middle of February. I knocked on the door of every neighbor on her cul-de-sac without success. Last house on cul-de-sac, which was across the street, told me she'd gone to her mother's out of town. Was able to get her number and contact her. She got a new heart that night. I'm retired now and still see her on occasion. She always makes a big deal and hugs me. She'd forgotten her pager and didn't go back to get it, thinking what are the chances they'll call tonight. Oh man, I thought you meant she was in her early 90s, not that the events took place in the early 1990s. That made much more sense on a reread. I'm glad I am not the only idiot here. Paramedic here. My best ever job was on a hot summer's day in Australia. We were called to an 11-year-old boy that had drowned in his family pool. I was halfway through a foot-long meatball sub when it happened and damn near shit myself. We were about 5 minutes away, and when we arrived the boy's mother was providing CPR while his 8-year-old twin sisters watched on, horrified. I checked the carotid pulse, non-existent, and started to take over on compressions. My partner started to unpack the defib pads while our student toweled the kid off. Defib comes back showing ventricular tachycardia, one of the only two shockable rhythms, so we hit him with the lightning and he instantly went back into a sinus rhythm, normal heart rhythm. Kid then began to splutter. We rolled him into the recovery position to help him get the water out of his lungs. In such a high-octane situation, it honestly felt so good to be able to successfully revive somebody. I still think about that job any time that I wonder why I'm in this profession. But did you ever get to finish that meatball sub? Always dude, yeeted that shit into my bag and devoured it later at hospital. ICU nurse in training. I did my cardiac care internship just a couple of weeks, and I distinctly remember this one English couple that went through our hospital. They were on holiday when the wife collapsed due to a heart infarction and was, successfully, resuscitated by her own son, 15, and the paramedics. She was in the ICU only for a couple of days and was then transferred to the queue. She was getting better each day, and each and every day her husband profusely thanked us. He went as far to bring stuff like donuts, cookies, chocolate, etc. to the nurses on the queue. It's not a big team. She after a while went to the normal ward, and the next day she was cleared to fly back to England again by our doctors. The husband came up to me with another share of donuts, and was so thankful for the staff helping his wife, tears and all. How happy they were they could go back home and see the children again. That's what keeps me going, not necessarily the thank yous, but to see we made a huge difference. It makes me proud of what we do. Smile. Very early in my career as a criminal defense attorney, I had a black college student charged with a shooting. It was getting a lot of media statewide due to one of the people involved being a professional athlete. After investigating, I became convinced that he was innocent and the actual shooter was probably one of the state's primary witnesses. I had only had a few jury trials at that point, and they all were defendants that were guilty as hell but refused to plead out. I didn't have a ton of faith in either a jury or my own ability to handle the case/consequences. I worked my ass off in preparation. Once we started trial, I realized I was knocking down every piece of evidence that the state was presenting. I was pumped with adrenaline and growing confidence. I tore up their star witness, who I thought was probably the actual shooter. One of the jurors actually laughed at the guy in disbelief of some of the things he was testifying to. I gave a 30-minute closing argument without even looking at my notes, with the jury nodding along to everything I was saying. They were out 20 minutes and came back with a not guilty verdict. Front page news article in the biggest papers in the state. Client's mom is hugging me and crying with relief in one of the photos. That guy still calls me up once a year to check in. Married, kids, solid white collar job. I always think of that case when I start to have doubts about doing defense work. I got a large justice boner. Great job. I used to work at an animal shelter and honestly had a lot of good days to pair with the bad ones. One of the coolest things I can remember happening was a family came looking to adopt a cat. We had a cat that was having a tough time getting adopted, so he got to roam free in the shelter to schmooze with people. Well, this family encounters the cat and they don't just fall in love, they had a huge sigh of relief. The shelter cat was their cat that went missing 5 years beforehand. They instantly recognized him and immediately readopted him. It was a really neat twist of fate. They say that you don't choose your cat chooses you. This cat had already made his choice. Why make it a second time? We successfully resuscitate a child suffering from smoke inhalation. And I delivered my first baby on Tuesday. Those were very good days. Congrats. Boy or girl? Boy. So on Halloween my boss decided to give everyone a $100 bonus by giving everyone $100 in an envelope, but that was just on the new wall side. The CMS side needed more people, so I went over there to help them out, and the boss on the CMS ended up coming through with a Winnie the Pooh costume and his kids. They gave them $100 bonuses. Since I went over there a lot and helped them out whenever they needed extra hands, I got another $100. And they had a pizza party there, so I didn't have to make lunch that day. We saved a couple of kids stuck in a locked warehouse. It made my day seeing their faces after we had rescued them. Medical student. The best day in the ER, it sure was the day where we saw one, very minor, patient in our 6-hour rotation. Not due to a lack of room or staff, but due to a lack of patients. No new patients means no people suffering of something new. After the rotation, an attending made a comment along the lines of heaven is the place where neither doctors nor police are needed, and frankly, I couldn't agree more. Sure, this was aided by the fact it was a long holidays, most people were out of town. My city is only 1.8 million people and there are around 7 or 8 ERs. But still. Moral of the story: when your job depends on others' misfortune, you sure love to be bored and without anything to do. I got to admit, the rush of adrenaline of receiving a trauma or cardiac arrest patient that nobody knew of beforehand is hard to beat though. I worked as an EMT for a number of years. My first and only full resuscitation has been one of the best days of my life. The joys of the medical fields, probably one of the only fields in which you get a dead man and you bring it back to life. I guess the other field where you get to do that is working as a messiah of Christianity, but last time I checked they haven't had interviews for some time now. You get to say "Nah, motherfucker, you're not dying today" and actually mean it. Was called to a home for a drowning 2-year-old patient. Drownings suck because they nearly always end badly. We arrive on scene and there is a mother holding a 3-year-old and another 2-year-old child is soaking wet playing on the ground getting muddy. Long story short, these people don't even have a pool. Their 3-year-old was messing on the phone and accidentally called 911. While on the line he kept telling the dispatcher that his brother was in the water. So the call came to us. Mom gave us cupcakes and we played with them in the mud for a little bit. Great day. Nurse here. I was a student on a cardiac unit and there was a lady there waiting for surgery. She and her husband spoke little English, although their friend was there sometimes to help translate. The night before her surgery her husband and friend left and I helped her take a sanitizing shower to prep for the next day. My preceptor told me her surgery was extremely risky and carried only a 20% chance of success. Neither of us were sure if she understood this fully, but she knew it was necessary and she was scared. I kept thinking it might be her last night on earth and she was here all alone. Through broken communication her last words to me that night were her thank yous because she said we were so sweet and caring in a time when she was so afraid. I didn't care whether I was allowed or not, but I gave her a strong hug before I left that night. On the eve of surgery she was all alone, regular hospital meal, with little ability to communicate. I left with a terrible sadness. I was relieved when I did see her the next week when she demanded more hugs and asked why I wasn't her nurse again. There are days we see someone for the last time, and sometimes we never find out. Then there are days when things go well and people remember the kindness they received instead of their fear. This has me all sorts of choked up. Thinking of her being scared and alone just made my heart drop. Kudos to you for doing what you could to comfort her. Edit, letter. I'm a newly qualified nurse, my first placement in NICU. We had a very sick baby who I was told was most likely to die at 2 years old. Her mum couldn't understand why she was there as she was a term baby. I'd been doing research and I tried my best to explain to her mum exactly what was happening and be a support. On my last day her mum hugged me and said thank you. I was very close to tears. I follow a photographer on Instagram who had take pictures of this baby girl for her 2nd birthday. It was that baby. It still makes me so proud that she defied all odds. She has cerebral palsy and global developmental delay, but she has surpassed everyone's expectations and is able to eat herself. Nothing makes me prouder than seeing her thrive. Medic here. Best day on the job was my no-hitter, not a single call in 14 hours. Glorious day that was. Firefighter EMT here. In 2 years I've had one 24-hour tour with 0 runs. It was nice at first, but after morning checks, breakfast, a workout, lunch and a movie I was bored. I'm normally at stations with 10 to 20 a day, but that day I was at a retirement station that gets maybe 3. There was a fire station like this near my old apartment complex. I lived fairly close to a huge park on one side and a highway interchange not too far off on the other. A major hospital on the 3rd corner and some more woodland and then a private school on the 4th. It was actually a really nice and quiet little nook. The only other thing on our street was a firehouse and the back of a doctor's office, hospital outbuilding. I think I saw a fire engine leave maybe twice. Most of the time the guys were playing basketball or smoking meat, grilling food. I got to know them because I was doing a health challenge and tracking my blood pressure. I would drop in, they would take it and we'd chat. I probably ended up raising my BP a little with all the awesome food they foisted on me. Great group. Felt sorta bad because they seemed sorta bored. Not actually the job but a part of it. It also counts as a workday according to payroll, so I count it. I work in oil exploration on international project sites, so I have to fly overseas to and from work sites every 6 weeks or so. Slight problem, I have a fear of flying, specifically turbulence. One time was heading back from work and had a 12-hour flight across the North Atlantic in winter to get home. For those not familiar, winter is the worst to fly that far north due to turbulence from the jet streams, so I was dreading that flight. Whole flight went by without even a bump. Also, got upgraded to business for free and the airline had Mars attacks on the IFE system. Best of all, was going home for 6 weeks of break. My favorite workday so far. If you're still afraid, maybe a few explanations from pilots could clear some things up for you and make you less afraid. I would recommend you to maybe watch a few videos from a YouTube channel called Mentor Pilot. He's got a few explanations for passengers. If you're hooked, you could check out Captain Joe, Stevie 01 Kini Avo, Flight Chops and many more too. Smile. Thanks for the advice. I completely understand that there is absolutely no danger. The Uber ride to the airport is more dangerous than the flight. It's one of those reptile brain things that scare you for no reason. I will hopefully be getting a promotion in the next few weeks anyway, so it may all be a moot point by then. I worked in a youth treatment center, 70% great days, 20% kinda crappy, 10% worst fucking shit ever. Best day? 2 hours of Halo, out for taco dinner, off to NHL game with kiddos. The first time I ever got a full Christmas bonus at my current job. $6,000 was more money than I had ever had at one time. I almost cried. I remember my first Christmas bonus. I had just bought the kids some modest toys which were all I could afford. I felt really depressed about it. Then I got a $500 check from a job where I had only worked for a few months. Kids got what they wanted and I felt like supermom. I still work there, but my kids are grown and gone. When I was in EMT school, my very first call I had ever gone on was a fall with a leg injury. I don't remember much from it, but I still remember the patient just holding my hand while I was doing her vitals. The entire time she just complimented me. It was honestly pretty heartwarming. I was a teacher in a low-income charter school, which you may recognize as a recipe for disaster. The school was poorly run, we had to provide most supplies ourselves, and had unreasonable and unrealistic expectations placed on us. I was teaching first grade at the time. We had a rule that only one child could be out of the classroom at a time, no matter what. I had 30 kids. Eventually, one of my kids had a bathroom accident. I have to say here, if I knew he had to go that bad, I would have let him go, rules be damned. He never gave any indication that it was an emergency. He did his best, but first graders have small bladders. I got him a change of clothes and minimized his embarrassment as much as I could. His mom was furious. She came in the next day and spent a solid 10 minutes screaming at me. A dean finally came and escorted her away, and I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. She stayed at the school the entire day and just watched. She saw what the teachers were going through and what we had to deal with. She came back to me at the end of the day and apologized. She was my biggest supporter from then on, and if I needed something, she had it for me. On the day I quit, she hugged me and told me that I was too good for that place and it was her son's last day too. Obviously, I've had better days than that in my career, but that was a day that gave me hope and helped me not give up my career due to one bad school. It's not often that people reverse their hate. It takes a certain personal strength to recognize when you're in the wrong, apologize for it, and change your actions. Volunteer EMT here. Somebody called 911 as they were driving when they saw 2 snowmobiles sitting in a field with 2 bodies lying next to them. Unwitnessed snowmobile collision in sub-zero temperatures? We're probably gonna end up dragging a pair of frozen corpses back to the truck. Hope neither of them is a child. We had 2 ambulances and God knows how many police cars cruising up and down the highway searching for this scene. The caller was still on the line. but he had kept on driving and was nowhere near the crash site. He was also unsure of exactly where he saw it first. He'd said it was near a church south of a certain intersection, but the only church on that stretch of road was north of that intersection. Meanwhile, our victims are out there freezing to death. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than 30 minutes, somebody realized that a certain pile of debris about a quarter of a mile away from the road looked kind of like a couple of snowmobiles when viewed from a certain angle. Dispatch confirmed a few more details with the caller, and we were all relieved to find that the hopeless scene we were all dreading was actually just a pile of crap some farmer left in his field months ago. I'd been designing this machine along with a mechanical engineer. I designed the controls for it and was reasonably sure it would be okay, maybe a few bugs to work out, but the code seemed stout enough. We powered the unit up, went through the setup cycle and went through the manual cycle. It worked perfectly. The me said, "Let's try auto." It worked without a single hiccup. That afternoon, a project I'd spent almost 2 months straight on ran its first product. The cool thing, the place I worked had a development clause for engineering. When you came up with an expansion or engineering plan, it was more or less written in stone. If you went over the date, you were shuffled down the project list. But if you finished before the date, they had a cool little feature. Every profit from that machine from the date it ran production until your scheduled end date was split up between the people who worked on it, since the company figured that money was a bonus anyway. We'd started production almost a month before our scheduled finish. I paid off a car and bought a motorcycle. Nice. That's actually a great policy, really great incentive.